Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take your source material, the research, the articles, all those surprising footnotes, and we really distill it down into, well, highly concentrated, actionable knowledge.
Right.
We don't just summarize. Our
Yeah.
goal is to find the insights that, truly make you well-informed. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into an organ system that is just, it's fundamental to life, but it's often ignored until it's far too late. We're talking about the kidneys.
Silent workhorses.
Exactly. I mean, if you ask most people what threatens their kidneys, they'll probably default to what, two main things?
Yep. Salt and diabetes.
General salt intake or, a diagnosed diabetes issue. And look, while those are certainly critical concerns, they completely miss the vast, subtle, and frankly, the silent assault that's happening every single day.
And it's happening through things we think are normal.
Normal, even healthy parts of our diet and, our medicine cabinet. So our mission today, and this is guided entirely by the extensive sources you shared, is to identify and really dissect 10 of the most common unexpected foods and compounds.
And we're talking about things that are chemically, well, burning, clogging, and degrading your renal system.
And this damage is slow, right? It's painless. It's often undetectable until permanent function is just gone. We're moving beyond the basics here to focus really intensely on the mechanism of harm.
And, the importance of this, it just cannot be overstated. We have this perception of the kidneys as these sturdy, kind of passive filters.
A pull filter or something.
Exactly. But they are incredibly sophisticated and extremely hard workers.
Right.
What's fascinating here, and what your sources really emphasize, is the sheer demand placed on them. The kidneys, they only make up about, 1% of your total body weight?
1%, that's tiny.
It's tiny, yet they receive the highest blood flow per unit of tissue of any organ in the body. They cycle through a staggering 20% of your entire cardiac output.
Wait, say that again? 20% of your heart's pump
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
is dedicated to just 1% of your body mass.
Precisely. And if you can grasp that enormous metabolic and circulatory requirement, you start to understand just how easily they can be overwhelmed or overloaded or, as we're going to see, starved of oxygen.
They are just incredibly sensitive to load and chemical burden.
Highly sensitive.
Well, that's the perfect context for why this countdown matters so much. We're structuring this deep dive by going from number 10 down to the single most powerful systemic threat.
And we're going to spend a lot of time on the how.
The how, exactly. So let's unpack this and jump right into part one, where we're looking at the systemic pressure points: electrolytes, hydration, and additives. Okay, starting at number 10, we have high-sodium processed foods. And this is, I think, where we need to challenge that common narrative immediately.
The salt is bad idea.
Yeah, that generalization. The sources suggest a much, much more nuanced view.
Oh, absolutely. The general public health messaging on this is it's too simplistic. The problem, as defined by your sources, is not inherent to sodium chloride itself.
So it's not the salt shaker on the table.
Not really.
Yeah.
The true issue is the imbalance that is structurally embedded in packaged, processed goods. So think canned soups, frozen dinners, anything commercially prepared for, a long shelf life and flavor enhancement.
So you're getting a massive, unbalanced sodium load.
A huge isolated load.
The critical insight here, then, is that most people might actually need more salt on their natural whole foods.
For nerve and muscle function, absolutely.
But the trouble starts when that sodium intake comes all by itself, without its necessary counterweight.
Which is potassium.
Potassium.
Correct. Potassium is the key regulatory ion for the kidney. So when you consume a high-sodium processed meal that is, inherently low in any plant-based nutrients, that sodium intake becomes a severe load.
A load, okay.
And that drastically increases renal stress. The kidneys are forced to overwork because they're trying to manage this massive osmotic influx, but they don't have the balancing force of potassium to help them.
So the kidney is just struggling to filter this excess sodium, and in that struggle, what's happening to my fluid retention?
It just skyrockets. The body holds on to excessive sodium, and because of that, fluid. It's trying desperately to maintain concentration balance.
And that fluid retention is the direct cause of increased blood pressure.
Yes. It's the pressure exerted inside the kidney's complex, delicate microvessels.
Let's elaborate on that mechanism of harm, because increased blood pressure sounds, a little abstract. What is it actually doing structurally to the kidney?
Okay, imagine the delicate filtration units of the kidney, the microvessels and the microtubules, as this network of extraordinarily fine, pressurized tubing.
Like tiny, tiny hoses.
The tiniest. And when the blood pressure in these vessels is chronically elevated, it's not just pressure, It's creating a constant abrasive friction. This pressure physically stresses the vessel walls, and that causes microvascular damage.
So it's left like a big pipe bursting and more like,
It's more like a constant sanding process. A
wow.
sanding process on the finest, most delicate structures of the organ. And over time, this friction leads to localized inflammation, degradation, and eventually scarring.
Which compromises the kidney's ability to filter anything correctly.
At all, the damage isn't instantaneous, it's cumulative, and it's physical. And it's all driven by the systemic consequence of poor electrolyte balance.
So the solution, as the sources point out, is rarely just stop eating salt.
No, it's about drastically improving the ratio. We need to pair that intake with potassium-rich foods, leafy greens, most plant-based foods, non-starchy vegetables.
Or, as the source mentioned, ensure balanced electrolyte intake through something like Ulite.
Exactly. That balanced input allows the kidney to manage fluid and pressure efficiently, and that takes the excessive stress off the whole filtration system.
That really sets a high bar for balance. Okay, let's shift focus now from systemic pressure to, well, chemical additives. Moving to number 9, we have a classic surprise factor, coffee creamers. These are often viewed as just harmless flavor agents, right?
They are anything but harmless.
Yeah.
And the surprise factor is intentional. I mean, most commercially sold non-dairy coffee creamers contain very little, if any, actual cream.
So what are they then?
They're highly processed, flavored chemical syrups. They're designed for taste, texture, and, indefinite shelf stability.
Okay, let's peel back the curtain on this chemical cocktail that we might be pouring into our coffee every morning. What are the key toxic agents that are targeting the kidney here?
We have to highlight 2 major categories. First, you've got the ubiquitous industrial stabilizers and whiteners.
Okay.
And foremost among them is titanium dioxide.
I've seen that on labels.
It's used as an emulsifier and for its brilliant white pigment. It basically tricks fat and water into mixing smoothly
Right.
and gives the product that creamy, opaque look.
Right.
Second, you have the whole host of artificial colorings and flavorings that are necessary to mimic natural cream and sugar profiles.
So titanium dioxide isn't just for color, it's like the structural glue holding the entire chemical sludge together.
It is.
So how does that translate into actual kidney damage?
Well, the mechanism of harm here is structural interference. Your sources indicate these chemicals interfere directly with the integrity of the kidney tissue.
How so?
Specifically, they cause the delicate renal membranes to leak.
Leak.
Yeah. I mean, if we zoom way into those filtration units, the glomeruli, they contain these highly specialized cells and a filtration barrier that should be incredibly selective.
A leaking membrane in the body's primary filtration system. That sounds, well, catastrophic over the long run.
It is a profound structural compromise. Long-term ingestion of these disruptive chemicals means that the filtration barrier loses its selectivity.
So things get through that shouldn't.
Exactly. And the ultimate observable consequence mentioned in the sources is the appearance of protein in the urine.
Proteinuria.
Proteinuria. Protein should be entirely retained by a healthy kidney. If it's escaping, it means the physical architecture, the actual fabric of the kidney's filtration net, is damaged. It's allowing large molecules through that should have been kept in.
It's a slow chemical degradation of the kidney's architecture itself.
That's it.
That puts a powerful spotlight on what seems like such an innocuous morning habit. Okay, let's jump to number 8. Alcohol. We all recognize the general effects of, excessive consumption, but let's zero in on the specific kidney stress factors, starting with the obvious one.
Dehydration.
Dehydration.
Alcohol is fundamentally a diuretic. It interferes with the body's production of vasopressin, or ADH.
The antidiuretic hormone.
Right, which is the hormone that tells your kidneys to hold on to water. By inhibiting ADH, alcohol forces the kidneys to excrete far more fluid than is normal.
And that creates 2 problems.
It does. First, dehydration puts this acute, heavy load on the filtration process. It's forcing the kidney to work with insufficient water pressure, which makes it less efficient and way more stressed.
And the second problem?
Second, as all that water is stripped out, the concentration of the waste products that are left behind in the fluid just skyrockets.
And one of those highly concentrated waste products is the specific toxic load that alcohol generates across all tissues.
High levels of uric acid.
Uric acid.
Exactly. And this is the more insidious long-term threat. Alcohol metabolism generates a significant spike in uric acid.
We need a clear analogy for the damage this actually causes.
Okay, imagine the microtubules in your kidneys where all this reabsorption happens are lined with this fine, sensitive tissue, like a silken netting.
Okay.
Uric acid, when it gets concentrated, forms small, sharp, glass-like crystals.
So those crystals are literally passing sandpaper through the silk.
That's the feeling. They are highly abrasive, they damage the soft, sensitive tissues, causing inflammation, cell death, and they promote the environment for kidney stones to form. The kidney is being forced to filter out this highly abrasive, crystalline waste.
And what about the combo threat our sources highlight? The idea that mixing alcohol makes the danger exponentially worse.
Well, if alcohol itself is creating a toxic uric acid load, mixing it often means you're layering on 2 additional kidney stressors.
Like what?
You're often mixing it with high-sugar beverages, which means high fructose, which is our #1 threat we'll get to later, and fructose is a massive accelerator of uric acid production. Or you're using artificial sweeteners, which, as we'll see, are chemically toxic in their own right and require heavy renal processing.
So you start with the dehydration and the natural uric acid spike from the alcohol, and then you just layer on chemicals and massive fructose loads.
It's a triple threat scenario. It's engineered to ensure maximum stress and corrosive damage to the renal structures.
It's the perfect engineered stressor cocktail. That theme of crystal formation provides a really smooth transition. Let's take that thought and move directly into part 2. Mineral and crystal formation threats, starting with one of the most misleading items on the grocery list. Item number 7 is green smoothies. And this one, this is the poster child for healthy living.
It really is.
We're told to load up on spinach, almonds, beet greens for daily nutrition, yet the sources are listing it as a threat. Why?
This is the ultimate healthy food trap, especially for those who might be susceptible to kidney issues. Many of the popular ingredients used in these high-volume, daily concoctions.
Spinach, almonds, beets.
Spinach, often raw or powdered. Almonds, especially in high concentrations like in almond milk and beets, they are all exceptionally high in oxalates.
Oxalates.
And the mechanism is pretty simple when an overload occurs. Oxalates are natural compounds, but in excessive daily doses, they bind with minerals.
Primarily calcium.
Primarily calcium, yes.
Yeah.
And they form these sharp, insoluble calcium oxalate crystals. These are the primary building blocks of kidney stones, and they cause inflammatory damage as they get concentrated and filtered by the renal tissue.
Okay, we absolutely must unpack the nuance here. The sources make it really clear that the problem isn't the existence of oxalates. We eat them all the time.
Right. It's the body's inability to handle them when they come in these overwhelming daily doses, often, extracted into a juice or a smoothie form.
So what are the body's 3 critical defense pathways against this kind of oxalate harm?
This is crucial knowledge for anyone trying to maximize their health through plant-based diets. If you fail any one of these steps, you raise your risk significantly.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, breakdown in the gut,
Okay.
the microbiome. Nature gave us specific bacteria for this very task. The most well-known is a little guy called Oxalobacter formigenes.
And what does it do?
This bacteria acts like a demolition crew. It consumes and breaks down oxalates right there in the large intestine, before they can even be absorbed into the bloodstream.
But what if you don't have that bacteria?
Well, if you have a weak, damaged, or undiverse microbiome, which is common after antibiotic use or years of a highly processed diet, this demolition crew was just missing.
So the oxalates proceed completely unchecked.
Unchecked. And if the bacteria fail, the oxalates are now moving through the gut, headed for absorption, unless
pathway number 2 catches them.
Precisely. Second, binding. Minerals. This is the mineral trap. Dietary calcium and magnesium are absolutely essential because they bind tightly to oxalates right there in the gut.
And when they're bound together?
When they're bound, they form an inert complex that is not water-soluble. Therefore, it's not absorbed. It's just excreted in the stool. And the kidney never even sees the free, dangerous oxalate molecule.
And this mineral trap only works if 2 conditions are met. You have to have adequate mineral intake, and you need efficient mineral absorption.
Which is often tied to stomach acid.
Absolutely.
The sources list factors that increase oxalate harm. Low hydrochloric acid, often caused by antacid use or just age, means poor calcium and magnesium absorption.
So if your absorption is low, or your diet is mineral deficient.
The mineral traps fail.
Yeah.
And the free oxalate is then absorbed directly into the bloodstream.
Which brings us to the third pathway, the final line of defense once the oxalate is actually in the blood.
Third, inhibition. Citrate. Once oxalates are in the blood, the real danger is that they'll encounter circulating calcium and bind to form crystals inside the renal tubules. This is how stones start.
And citrate stops this.
Citrate, often from citric acid like you'd find in lemon juice, acts as a trap here too. It prevents the circulating oxalates from binding to calcium in the blood. It effectively neutralizes their crystal-forming potential and makes them easier to excrete.
So for the learner trying to be healthy, the takeaway isn't don't eat spinach.
Not at all.
It's don't excessively blend high oxalate foods every single day if you know you are chronically dehydrated, constipated, mineral deficient, or maybe suffering from a compromised gut barrier.
You're just setting up a multi-point system failure. It shifts the focus from avoiding a vegetable to prioritizing your gut and mineral health as the primary kidney defense.
That is just robust context. Let's shift gears and move to number 4. It's another mineral threat, but this time we're dealing with an industrial compound that causes tissue hardening. Phosphate-loaded foods.
Right, and this category deals almost exclusively with fake foods,
Why fake?
because they rely on inorganic phosphate preservatives.
Yeah.
We are talking about stabilizing agents in processed cheeses, the cheap, awful slices you put on burgers.
I know the ones.
Nearly all carbonated soft drinks, sodas, and commercially packaged frozen meals or TV dinners.
Okay, but phosphate is essential for our bone structure, right? Along with calcium. We need it.
We do.
So where's the paradox in the type of phosphate they're using?
The issue lies in the chemical bond and the resulting absorption rate.
Mhm.
When we consume phosphate that's naturally bound within a whole foods, like in a piece of meat or some legumes, the body's natural enzymes have to break the organic bonds first.
So it's a slow process.
It's a slow, regulated process. This allows the body to regulate absorption. Consequently, we only absorb about 30 to 40% of the natural phosphate.
That's our evolved regulatory mechanism ensuring we don't overdose on minerals.
Exactly. Now contrast that with these synthetic inorganic phosphates used as preservatives.
What's the difference?
They are highly soluble and they completely bypass this natural regulatory mechanism. They are absorbed at a stunning rate, often up to 90%,
90%.
instantly overwhelming the system.
90% absorption versus 30-40. That load difference must be just catastrophic for the kidneys.
It is an overwhelming load. The kidneys, already working at 20% cardiac output, simply cannot handle this sudden, massive influx of synthetic inorganic phosphate.
And the excess doesn't just pass through harmlessly.
No. It causes accumulation in soft tissues, rather than just being deposited correctly into the bone matrix. This accumulation happens specifically in the soft functional tissues of the kidneys and critically in the arteries.
And this leads to that severe consequence mentioned in the sources, renal osteodystrophy. Explain that term because it sounds dramatic.
It sounds academic, but the name tells the terrifying story. Renal kidney, osteobone, dystrophy, abnormal development.
So bone growing where it shouldn't.
It means bone-like changes are happening where they absolutely shouldn't. The severe mineral imbalance and the resulting stress and scarring cause the kidney's soft filtration tissue to begin to calcify, to harden internally.
Wow.
The body is trying to deposit this overwhelming mineral load, but the processing is failing, leading to internal scarring and rigidity. It transforms the soft, flexible filtration structure into rigid, non-functional tissue.
So you are essentially rigidifying your body's primary filter.
It's a direct consequence of consuming industrially designed compounds that our metabolism hasn't evolved to regulate.
That is a stunning side effect of processing foods for shelf stability. Okay, let's transition now into part 3. Industrialized toxins and processing byproducts. These are the compounds that hit the kidneys with direct, often caustic, cellular toxicity, starting with the ubiquitous world of sweeteners. We're moving to number 6. Artificial sweeteners. We mentioned them as cocktail mixers, but let's detail the unique cellular toxicity they exert because the chemical cascade is quite disturbing.
This is where we see the most aggressive, direct chemical assault on renal tissue. The sources highlight the big 3 culprits found in thousands of diet sodas, sugar-free foods, gums.
And they are.
Aspartame, sucralose, and asulfame potassium, or ACE-K.
Let's start with aspartame. I know the source mentioned formaldehyde. That's just a shocking breakdown product. Can you detail that toxic cascade for us?
Sure. Aspartame is a complex molecule that once you consume it, begins a chain reaction. It breaks down into 3 key components. The first is methanol, wood alcohol, a known toxin that historically causes blindness in high doses. That methanol, once it's metabolized, further breaks down into formaldehyde.
Formaldehyde, the stuff they use to preserve biological specimens in a jar.
Precisely. And that's what your kidney tissue is being subjected to. But the cascade doesn't stop there. It also breaks down into formic acid, which is highly irritating.
So this toxic sequence subjects the kidney tissue, which is tasked with clearing these byproducts, to a constant low-level chemical bath.
A bath of known tissue irritants and preservatives. The cells are effectively trying to filter out corrosive agents that are actively being created inside your own bloodstream.
That is an overwhelming load. Okay, what about sucralose, which is commonly known as Splenda?
Sucralose is designed to be a sugar derivative, but it's chemically altered. The sources highlight that its ingestion changes the fundamental function of the tubules in the kidneys.
The tubules.
Yeah, these tubules are critical for reabsorbing water, salts, glucose, amino acids. They fine-tune the body's fluid balance.
And when their function is altered by sucralose,
The entire filtration and reabsorption process becomes dysfunctional. The kidney literally cannot efficiently recycle vital materials and excrete only the waste. It's an impairment of the core operational ability of the renal cell itself.
and finally, asulfame potassium, or ACE-K.
ACE-K seems to target the energy centers directly. The research suggests that it accumulates in the kidney tissue and causes significant mitochondrial damage and oxidative stress.
And we talked about the kidney's high energy requirement.
Exactly. It's constantly pumping ions and reclaiming nutrients. If you damage the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, the entire renal cell's ability to perform its energy-intensive job just stalls.
It's a systemic power failure.
That leads to cell dysfunction and eventually cell death.
So we have chemical preservation and burning from aspartame, structural and functional impairment from sucralose, and mitochondrial power failure from ACE-K. The summary is that all three are just designed to break down the integrity and function of the renal structure over time. Let's move to number 5, processed meats. Before we get into the additives, we really need to thoroughly clear up that common myth that protein is bad for kidneys.
Yes, this is a generalization that unfairly targets an essential macronutrient. Protein is absolutely necessary. It's the building block for all cellular repair, and the kidney tissue itself needs it to maintain and repair its own structures.
But protein metabolism creates waste.
It does. It results in nitrogenous waste, urea, which the kidneys must filter. But a healthy kidney is designed for this natural load.
So when does that natural protein load become a serious risk factor?
Really only under highly extreme or compromised conditions. For example, the sources mention those almost mythical rabbit starvation diets, consuming enormous quantities, like 3,400 grams or more, of extremely lean protein with almost no fat or carbohydrates. That creates an unnatural, overwhelming nitrogenous waste burden.
And more commonly,
High protein only becomes a risk if it's layered on top of pre-existing conditions,
like
like undiagnosed metabolic disease,
Mm.
severe dehydration, or existing unrecognized chronic kidney issues. If those cofactors exist, then yes, reducing protein can be an aid, but the issue is always the underlying systemic pathology, not the natural protein itself.
Understood. So the problem with processed meats like bacon, sausage, deli slices, it isn't the protein.
No, it's the package it comes in.
So what are the additives and chemical stressors that make these so dangerous?
Processed meats combine multiple powerful renal stressors. We had to revisit the phosphate preservatives we just discussed, that overwhelming 90% absorption rate.
Right.
Second, you've got nitrates and nitrites, used for curing, color stability, and bacterial inhibition. But the third, and perhaps most corrosive factor, is the creation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. These are complex, highly reactive molecules that form when proteins or fats are exposed to very high sustained heat. Think frying bacon, sausages, or high-temperature grilling.
And they're bad for
They are highly corrosive and inflammatory to almost all tissue types,
Yep.
and the kidney is constantly having to filter them out.
So the combination is the core threat. The acid load and calcifying effect of the inorganic phosphates, coupled with the inflammatory corrosive assault of the AGEs. What's the final result on the kidney?
It results in a chronically increased acid load on the whole system. This severe internal acidity, combined with a chemical attack from AGs and phosphates, heavily promotes calcification and scarring, which is known as fibrosis, within the delicate structures of the kidney.
It's just a continuous internal inflammatory reaction.
Driven by a cascade of artificial chemicals and heat-damaged protein products.
We're seeing a pattern here. The body is constantly fighting against compounds it just hasn't evolved to process efficiently. And that brings us to number 2 on the list, a product that is central to modern industrial food, seed oils.
Yes. We're talking about the mass-produced oils sold under those generic names like vegetable oil.
Corn, canola, soybean oil.
Exactly. And it's critical to understand the source's argument here. The raw food source isn't the problem. It's the industrial processing required to render them edible, shelf-stable, and cheap.
Describe the sheer processing brutality required to get this oil out of the seed.
Well, to extract every last drop efficiently and maximize profit, the seeds are subjected to an extremely harsh, multi-step process. This involves crushing under intense pressure, the application of very high heat, and critically, the use of chemical solvents,
Solvents like what?
often petrochemical derivatives like hexane or acetone, to dissolve the final remaining oil.
So they're using chemicals to get the last bits of oil out.
And after that solvent extraction, the oil is still cloudy and unstable, so it is subjected to even further chemical treatments, degumming, bleaching, and high-heat deodorizing, all to eliminate the rancid smell and cloudy color that was created by the initial harsh extraction.
The chemical outcome of all this brutality is the true source of kidney damage.
Yes, this relentless, harsh processing, especially the heat and the chemical contact, it oxidizes the polyunsaturated fatty acids in the oil. And the resulting chemical byproduct is a class of compounds called aldehydes.
Aldehyde.
We're talking about highly toxic compounds that should have no place in a consumable product. Things like 4-HNE and melandialdehyde.
And these aldehydes are directly toxic to kidney cells. How do they specifically damage the filtration structure?
They target the core filtration unit, the glomeruli. The glomeruli are these sophisticated bundles of capillaries, the finest vessels in the body, that perform the initial sieve.
Okay.
Aldehydes are highly reactive and directly toxic to the cells making up the sieve. They actively scar them and degrade the filtration membranes over time. They also damage the tubules that are responsible for reabsorption.
So the systematic scarring just means the kidney's ability to correctly filter waste, balance fluids, and retain nutrients is just.
It's irreversibly degraded by the ingestion of these industrialized byproducts. It's a systemic, long-term assault on the organ's structural integrity.
We've covered everything from structural leaks caused by creamers and corrosive acids, from processed meats to calcification from phosphates, and now oxidative damage from aldehydes. Now we move into the top two stressors, which represent the most powerful acute threats to blood flow and metabolism. Coming in at number 3, and this is, I think, a vital public safety warning disguised as an item on the list, are NSAIDs, over-the-counter painkillers.
Ibuprofen, naproxen.
They're ubiquitous.
And this needs to be a mandatory component of our understanding. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, achieve pain relief by blocking a chemical messenger called prostaglandin.
That blockade, however, has a profound and immediate consequence for the kidney's survival.
It is functionally a disaster for the kidney. Blocking prostaglandins effectively and significantly blocks and reduces blood flow to the kidneys.
Why does the kidney rely on prostaglandins so heavily, and why is this reduction in blood flow so catastrophic?
Well, the kidney is unique because it has to maintain a constant high pressure and flow rate to filter that 20% of your cardiac output. Prostaglandins are critical messengers involved in what's called renal autoregulation.
Which is?
It's the kidney's own internal mechanism for ensuring it always receives enough blood flow, regardless of what the rest of the body is doing.
So when you block prostaglandin,
You are actively interfering with the kidney's ability to protect its own blood supply.
and the result is a reduced flow, meaning significantly less oxygen is being delivered.
And we have to remember that the kidneys are extremely metabolically active. Their work of filtration and reabsorption is hugely energy intensive.
So the NSAID reduces the blood flow, which means less oxygen is delivered, but the workload filtering all the systemic toxins, that stays exactly the same.
Exactly.
You're forcing this high output system to run without its necessary fuel.
Precisely. This forces the kidney cells into an extreme state of oxygen debt, which is known as ischemia. This stress is acute and it's immediate.
And the result?
Rapid tissue damage, cell death, and with more than just occasional sparing use, permanent tissue loss and immeasurable loss of filtration capacity. If you take NSAIDs regularly for chronic pain, you are functionally suffocating the hardest working cells in your body.
It is a transactional use with a heavy long-term cost to renal function.
A very heavy cost.
That context should fundamentally change how people view that little white pill in their cabinet. It's a calculated, acute risk. And finally, we arrive at the number one source of kidney damage on our list, the core metabolic threat to the entire system: sugar and fructose.
This is a huge category. It includes the obvious, like sweetened sodas, candy, desserts, specifically anything utilizing high fructose corn syrup or HFCS.
But we have to expand the scope beyond that, right?
We do. We need to include high fructose healthy alternatives like agave, which can be up to 80% fructose, and even honey due to its high fructose content.
The crucial distinction here is between glucose and fructose. Why does fructose hit the kidney so differently than other sugars?
Glucose is relatively benign in the short term, because it can be processed by almost every single cell on the body for immediate energy. Fructose is fundamentally different. It can only be metabolized by the liver in significant quantities.
So it forces all the metabolic burden onto one single
One
organ.
organ. And when the liver is faced with a high load, like drinking a massive sweetened beverage, a metabolic chain reaction begins that specifically creates renal toxicity.
Okay, what is that reaction?
When liver processes large amounts of fructose rapidly, it activates an enzyme called fructokinase. This process uses massive amounts of ATP adenosine triphosphate,
Our cell's energy currency.
our energy currency.
Mm.
And fructose metabolism is unique because it causes this ATP to break down drastically fast. It effectively cannibalizes the cell's own energy stores.
And this is the crucial insight that links sugar back to our crystal threat.
It is. The rapid breakdown of ATP doesn't just leave the cell energy deprived, it releases the nitrogenous backbone of the molecule, the adenosine,
And this nitrogen,
is instantly converted by the body into uric acid.
which means fructose consumption is the single fastest, most profound way to raise systemic uric acid levels.
It often bypasses the regulatory mechanisms that deal with protein or alcohol-derived uric acid. This is the core mechanism of danger.
So the kidney is already dealing with an energy deficit from the cannibalized ATP, and at the same time, it's being forced to filter this sudden, massive surge of highly corrosive, crystal-forming uric acid.
It's a toxic combination that leads directly to scarring, stone formation, chronic inflammation, and permanent functional damage. It's not just a calorie problem, it's a corrosive waste product problem.
Generated by the specific energy-costly way our body handles fructose. So sugar is the 1-2 punch. First, the chronic metabolic disease, like diabetes, that we know damages kidneys. And second, the acute corrosive and abrasive damage caused by the high uric acid levels generated during the breakdown of the energy molecule itself.
A truly powerful systemic threat.
That concludes our comprehensive countdown. Let's step back and synthesize the categories of damage we've uncovered today. #tag outro.
Looking across all 10 of these items, we've really identified 4 major interconnected mechanisms by which common products are assaulting the renal system every single day.
First, we established the threat of crystal formation from abrasive compounds, the oxalates in those high-dose green juices, and most powerfully, uric acid.
Which is accelerated by fructose and alcohol. These are physical and chemical abrasives.
Second, we found the danger of mineral imbalance and calcification. This is primarily from that overwhelming 90% absorption rate of inorganic phosphate preservatives in processed foods.
Which leads to the hardening and scarring known as renal osteodystrophy. And this is all compounded by the poor sodium-potassium ratio in processed goods, which causes that microvascular friction.
Third, we detailed direct chemical toxicity from multiple industrial avenues, the artificial sweeteners,
Aspartame creating formaldehyde, ACE-K causing mitochondrial power failure.
the seed oil aldehydes, which are scarring the delicate glomeruli, and the chemical cocktails and creamers, causing those structural membrane leaks.
And finally, there's that acute but often overlooked physical stress mechanism. The restricted blood flow and subsequent oxygen debt caused by common NSAID painkillers.
Forcing the kidneys into an ischemic state, functionally suffocating them while they work. So the actionable takeaway for you, the learner, is clear. The most dangerous items aren't natural foods or simple salt. They are the processed, the chemically altered, and the unbalanced compounds designed for industrial convenience.
Right.
Critical thinking about the ingredients list is paramount because the worst damage is caused by things synthesized to bypass the body's natural, evolved regulatory systems.
And, this requires a shift in perspective. If we understand that processed foods and certain chemicals actively accelerate the production of abrasive compounds like uric acid and cause soft tissue calcification, it really forces us to ask, what does this imply about the long-term systemic health of an entire population that's consuming these silent attackers every day?
We saw that the microbiome and adequate mineral intake are the mechanisms designed to break down and bind threats like oxalates and control that phosphate load.
So how does focusing on maintaining this microbial defense and mineral intake become the first most powerful line of defense against these systemic threats rather than, waiting for a diagnosis and treatment when permanent structural damage is already advanced? The deep dive is over, but the thinking has just begun.